Welcome to Leaders with Heart. I'm your host, Paddy McDonald, and today we're speaking with Steve Singh, who is the host of the Squeezing the Plums podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping men squeeze the most out of life. He's also the founder of his own podiatry business and has previously run successful entertainment businesses in other industries as well. And what I love about this conversation with Steve is that more than his business success, he's someone who is deeply on his own journey of being of service to the world. And he's had his fair share of challenges and pains, and he's brought a lot of awareness to those to now transform that into ways to help others through similar challenges and pains themselves. So I think you're going to love meeting Steve. I know I did. And if you have any questions or want to connect with either of us, you can connect with us via the links in the show notes. Enjoy the conversation. Welcome to Leaders with Heart. I'm here today with Steve Singh and super excited for this conversation today, brother. For context, for people new to Steve's work, he's the host of the Squeezing the Plums podcast, and I was fortunate to come on and have a great conversation with you about a week or two back. And in getting to meet you, I was really struck by your level of diversity in your experience and how you see the world, but also your ability to translate and really connect with people from all different walks of life so that your message can be heard. And it really impressed me and something I want to learn from myself, and excited to see where this conversation leads us today.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on. It's great to have the opportunity to be on the other end of the conversation as opposed to leading it. And I look forward to sort of going in deep with what the mission is for your podcast, and hopefully being able to deliver something of value to your listeners too.
Amazing, man. Amazing. And you asked a really potent question at the start of your podcast, which I know is something that you ask all of your guests now, which I'm going to paraphrase and probably butcher it. But what I heard you ask me was, if everyone in the world kind of had to reset, if the population kind of went down to the bare minimum and we had to restart, and you were there to help guide and lead the new world forward, and you had an opportunity to share your message with people in a TED Talk kind of way, what would be the message or the topic that you would speak to?
It's a great question, that one. Because when I've previously asked it to guests, it's a lot to take in, and I've always asked that question based off the premise of their experience of life and what value based off their experience of life they can give back, as opposed to, I guess, what they think the world needs.
Yeah.
And so I guess my experience of life really sort of echoes down to a couple of key points, which is how to build real self-worth within yourself and understanding, and also how to open your heart when you're so in your head. And the power of doing that, and especially in front of men, for instance, it's not a soft thing. It's actually an incredibly powerful thing to be fully connected. And I guess we're a product of the way we are brought up, our environments, and what we choose to see here and then put back out into the world. And so I think self-worth and also the idea of being really connected and open to being, your authentic self, not operating out of fear, is what I think the world would benefit from in that instance, because I think I'd be able to speak to that quite a lot.
Yeah, beautiful, man. Actually, I was at a networking lunch the other day, and someone asked what I do, and I sort of paraphrased and said that I help leaders really be their true selves when they lead. And he asked me, like, oh, isn't that really scary? Because when someone's their true self, they open themselves up to ridicule. And it surprised me, I guess, because I've been on this path for a while, and that I've come to associate authenticity with courage and authenticity with freedom and all of the other positive associations. But it was a great reminder that for a lot of people, the experience of being themselves is one that comes with hurt and fear around social judgment as well. And it sounds like, self-worth is very tied to that as well.
I think so, and I think we all get pigeonholed into thinking we can only have one nature of being expressive, and there are multiple layers to all of us. So how you don't have to act at home how you act at the workplace and vice versa.
Yeah.
Like you can show up as someone that can wear different hats, that can be diverse. Like that's not the issue. I think the issue is when you feel that you can't like when you're really compressing a version of yourself in order to fit in. I think that's where the problem really stems from, rather than understanding that you sometimes have to operate in different frequencies in order to be able to achieve an outcome. And anyone whether they're at the C-suite level or the sole practitioner level knows that you're going to have different frequency in talking, energy, and ways that you converse based off your environment. And that's just having the capacity to be a little bit of a neutral observer, knowing the environment you're in, but then also understanding that when you get yourself into those positions, you have an opportunity to be able to move towards a direction. But on the flip side, if you are going into work every day, or you are moving back into the house every day, and you are bottling up stuff that otherwise would be great to let out, because you have a fear of how people will either perceive you, and generally it's the fear of like rejection, humiliation, understanding, then it's a lot to work through, man. And I think that's something that I think a lot of people do have come up for them. It definitely come up for me.
Yeah. What's been your journey with that?
So I think the best way to sort of frame my journey is understanding around a condition that I had sustained as a role of really building up a lot of guilt and shame in myself. And it's not to make it a massive soppy story or anything along those lines, but in short, I grew up in a very strict traditional Indian household. I had parents that were very supportive, and their way of showing love was, wanting me to do the best I could at everything, but also putting the layer of responsibility onto that, to the point where it was, you're the oldest, lead by example, everyone's watching you, every part of every relative is always looking up at you. You're like, so you have all this stuff, you get the scholarship for playing sport, you're the captain of the footy and the cricket team, but in the process of doing all of that, there's this overbearing level of needing to prove and show. And it got to a stage for me where, although I was great in one field of life, the other field of life I really struggled with was communicating to my parents around being able to talk about love and women and wanting to have a marriage or a relationship one day, because it wasn't fitting into their culture. And so I compressed a lot of that, and I was never able to fully open myself up because of the fear of you're not leading by example anymore. And that was really hard.
Absolutely.
Right? And so as a young man, how do you navigate that when you're the oldest guy? You don't have any uncles to speak to necessarily. You don't have an older brother. And for me, I didn't actually have really any friends at all. Coming from an Indian culture, there was a lot more racism probably back then than there is now. And my perception of that racism towards me really put me in a position where I was like, I struggled. I had no cheekiness. So my ability to fight back with words was limited. And so there was just a great deal of internalization of stress and pressure, which led me to a situation which I talk about on my first podcast, which is around me being on an overseas trip that my dad saved up a heap of money to go on as a cab driver, and allowed me to go on a trip to the UK with a bunch of boys for cricket, which I was trying to become the captain of the school cricket team. And I remember trying to also have a balance between that and wanting to rebel and fit in with the group of lads that I was in. So I've gone from, here's my old man that saved up and worked his ass off to give me an opportunity, to here's an opportunity with all the boys away from home, finally, fucking thank God, to be able to express myself, have a beer, speak a bit of shit, let the shoulders go, right? And in the process of trying to do that, I had a massive headache. And when I mean massive, this thing at the time I didn't know, but it was called a cluster headache, which is like I explained in a pain scale that was done in the research for the headache. One of the headache clinics in the US, they did a piece of research. I think it was like the American Migraine and Headache Disorder Clinic or something along those lines, where they showed a pain scale, and they showed if you got people that experienced this headache, how they viewed other pains.
Okay.
And labour pain was a 7 out of 10, being stabbed was a 5 out of 10, being having a headache was a 2 out of 10, like, you know.
Yeah.
And so I had this huge build-up of
Yeah.
stress. Now we see that with people that have burnout to the nth degree. We see that in people that are, you know, have their marriages break down because they have an episode where they just fucking lose it.
Yeah.
Like, for me, it was so much internalization that it ended up affecting my body.
Yeah. And so what was the rating for the pain of?
Oh, it was 9.7.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is torture.
Wow.
You know, and ironically, you know, I had built myself up in such a way that when this come on, like I was yelling and screaming a bit, but I didn't want to project it onto anyone.
So suppressing it.
Suppressing the pain, again, not knowing that the pain was caused from suppression.
Wow. Yeah,
right?
brutal.
So it's a really bad feedback loop. You know, it's like an avalanche. It's like, well, now you've just had the big fuck off event. Then it's just like, well, if you don't address that, you're going to get event. And so this is called a cluster headache. So guess what happens? You get cluster wave.
Yep.
And that happened for about from 16 years of age to 30.
Whoa.
So, and I had, over the course of my time playing different sports, starting up different businesses, I had over about 700 episodes of this. Okay. And I guess with all of that happening, I think when you talk about what would you talk if you had the opportunity to do a TED Talk and to go and sit down, and this is the TED Talk right here, you know, speaking to whoever's listening, is really understanding that how you govern your self-worth is very important, and also how you govern being able to connect head and heart is really bloody important. Because if you're just all upstairs and you don't know how to open this up, you're stuck. And if you don't even know that's a thing, which a lot of us don't even know that's a thing,
I was there.
then you're really fucking stuck.
So let's start there.
Sure.
Let's start there for someone who doesn't know it's a thing. What are we talking about?
Sure. So I guess a lot of us, especially in leadership positions, we are projectors. We like to know what's happening in the future. We like to know how to set things out. We need to know how this event and this event can lead to X result or Y result, right? So we are very much in our logical mind, and we need to be in some way, because we need to be able to articulate to people the direction in which we're moving. Otherwise, people are not able to have any clarity, right?
So like the vision and like the people feeling confident to follow towards the vision is a common kind of metaphor in business.
Absolutely. You know, if you are not able to influence people that your direction of movement is in the company or in the person's best interest, then you're not being able to demonstrate that effectively. And it needs to be processed in a certain way. Now, when we talk about the heart, it's interesting, the amount of electromagnetic energy, or the energy that's derived from the heart, is some stupid number more than that we get from the brain. And then that sort of connects more to our intuition and how we feel. Now, I guess that comes then down to knowing that if we are process driven to the point of not listening to how we feel in any moment, then we are rejecting the biggest feeling component and decision-making component we have.
Interesting.
Right? And so if you're a decision maker and you know that a massive decision-making process is actually listening to your heart and you don't know how to do it, well, I'd work on it now that I know it.
It'd be like leading a democracy and you decide that like 70% of the votes don't matter. I'm just not going to listen to those votes. I'm only going to listen to the other 30%. Like, it doesn't make sense.
But it's scientific. So when I found out it was scientific, I'm like, this isn't so fucking woo-woo.
Yeah.
This is legit.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, because as my role as a podiatrist, obviously you have you're looking at biomechanics, you're looking at, the visceral structures of the body versus the, musculoskeletal structures of the body. So you're really like analyzing shit.
Yeah.
And it's only a small part of the body that I look at, but nevertheless, you get taught,
Yep.
Full anatomy, physiology, and then you work, narrow it down. When you find out through your own journey, on whatever that journey is, that a big way to help govern your decisions should also be through leaning into the feelings that come up, that's really interesting because that's not taught.
Yep.
And then you question yourself because you're rationalizing how you feel.
Yep. Yep.
And so that can be a confusing part to all of this. But in saying that as well, if you know that there's power instilled within listening a little bit, it does give you a bit of peace when you make your decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you do what you think is the best thing and feels the best thing to do at the time.
Yep.
And when you do that, you're operating out of a good intention, right?
Yep.
As opposed to a really tunnel-visioned intention.
Yep.
One that you've probably constructed and made up all this time and time again. And so that's how I would, in some way, shape or form, define almost the undefinable, which is there is a scientific reason why we have more energy through this part of our body than in the brain.
Yep.
And so when we know that that's a part of that and that we produce more there, we also know that we need to listen.
Yep.
It's like they talk about the gut, the brain and the heart as the three brains.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? And so when
I've heard that word, it is the three decision-making centers.
And when you know that you can tap into all decision-making centers, well, you're going to feel a little bit better about yourself. Now, I'll give you an example. In business, I feel I can do that well.
Yep.
In relationships, I really fucking struggle.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that's because of, my upbringing and, like I said at the very start of the podcast, not being able to speak up about relationships and women and what they mean to me.
Yep.
Right? And so knowing that, I now look so far in the future and going, well, if they got this wrong with them now, and that's not kind of working, well, then I'm fucked when it gets to 5 years down the track and I can't lean into this.
Yeah.
And that's stuff that I've recently worked on.
Yeah.
Right? And so that will happen. If everyone will have their different part of that. So for some people, it's the inability to be able to lean into making a decision at all. It's like, I don't want to make the decision. I don't want to be wrong. And it's like, well, you're really holding yourself back from massive growth.
Yeah. Because not making a decision is a decision as well.
Absolutely. But it's a decision that you've made out of fear.
Yep.
Rather than courage of being able to lean into what you truly feel.
Yep.
And by the way, it is not a magic switch. It is not like one day you sit down and you do some breathing exercises and all of a sudden you know how to feel. It is years, and I'm sorry because a lot of people get turned off when they hear that. They're like, oh, can't be fucked.
Yep.
It is years of work, man. And I only did the work because of the pain that I was going through.
Yep.
Otherwise, I probably would have been, I would have been a very different person.
Yep.
But everyone's journey is always going to be different. And so for me, experiencing the pain that I felt, I had to tap into other decision-making centers. I had to tap into emotion, and I had to let shit go.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to lead in terms of my business and my direction of what businesses I pursue in the future. Allowed me to lead that better because it was no longer around the idea of making my parents proud, having a massive clinic with 100 fucking podiatrists, and that's what successful looks like. It's like, well, I'm glad I never did that. I now work for myself as a podiatrist. I've got 3 clinical sites. My profit margins are much better because your break-even margins when you get 2 or 3 podiatrists is actually no better. It's just more stress. And you start to operate differently. And those decisions came to me when I got out of my head. And I think there's a lot of people that when they're in their head, they're really conforming back to a certain governing and decision-making process rather than another process.
Yeah, incredible, man. I love that story, and really can really empathize with those experiences as a teenager that you shared as well, that led you to have the physical challenges, which is just next level in terms of the amount of struggle there. But it does sound as though that's been a real gift in terms of the way it's opened up your path on the other side of it. And it also, from chatting to you before, it sounds like that ability to really be with the discomfort, to really be in the pain. At first it was suppressed, but over time you were able to find other ways of navigating through it. That you've then been able to apply that ability to challenging situations in business, for example. Can you speak a little bit about the relationship with challenging times?
I think when we look at challenging times, so if I'm a listener and I'm listening to this and you're going through a challenging time, what is it about the challenging time that makes it challenging, right? Is it the fact that you have a fear around a roof over your head, right? Like an actual, I'm genuinely fucked if this doesn't work out. Or is it around something more maybe trivial in nature, but the emotion still comes up? So it may be that I don't get the respect of my colleagues, right? And so the challenges that I sort of had to go through were a bit of both, right? Was the challenge of how I was perceived in my friendship group of people trying to be successful and making money and doing well. When in the startup sense, I had a couple of different startups that were revving hard but not going anywhere. Right? And I'm putting the foot on the accelerator. And it ain't moving. And then I have to be able to explain to my family or friends that I'm working hard and getting nowhere. Right? That's really challenging because you're then questioning if you're good enough. And you're also giving them the permission to also question if you're good enough. And then the other challenge is when you hit a position in time in life where you know that there's a very real sense of an idea that you may not have a roof over your head, right? And that can be anything from high lines of credit to a negative bank account when rent is due in a day or two's time and you don't know where you're going to get your next dollar.
And to be clear as well, we're talking about that's one form of this survival threat, we could say, for example, where objectively times are hard. And the alternative you mentioned before is the feelings are coming up because we all have our own conditioning, our own history, which means that things might look rosy on the outside, but there's a lot going on the inside, which is equally tough, and it's as challenging to go through, but it's more of an internal emotional challenge versus a physical survival challenge, which an example of is roof over the head.
100%. 100%. I hope I'm answering this question in a way that sort of reflects what you were trying to get out of it. But really, my end thing was around understanding that in those challenges, and my experience of those challenges, how you reposition your thought processes is what allowed me to work through those challenges massively. And how the internal dialogue I created for myself was very powerful and very uplifting. Even though the circumstances would mirror something very different.
Wow. Amazing. And so that's something that you were able to apply to both of those paths, right? So if
Correct.
it's an internal or an external challenge, which, again, we all go through in different ways, but the approach that worked for you was shifting the internal conversations.
Huge.
Yeah.
And an example of that would be, so when I was getting the headaches,
Yep.
imagine if you were stuck in your car, you are on the way to work,
Yep.
and you realize that the headache is coming on. Full and well knowing the headache is a 9.7 out of 10.
Yep.
The fear that runs through your body is enough to feel like your whole world's about to shatter, right? And I had a moment where I was in the car. It was really hot and heat wasn't great.
Yep.
The experience that I got with cluster headaches was that one side of my eye would blow up, like it would be like a dam, like you know how a dam would block any water going through.
Yep.
Well, imagine that water is blood, and effectively that dam gets blown open, and all the blood pushes my eye to the point where it wants to pop out. So that is how it feels, right? And at that point in time, there was two internal dialogues going at the same time, which tends to be the case, right? It's never just one. It's like
At least two.
You have to be able to choose or create the thought that you want. And so one of them is why me, which I reckon every single person
Yep.
explains, like, why the hell is this happening to me?
Yep.
Not again. Oh no, right? And then the other one for me was, one day I'm going to reflect on this, and this is going to be something that allows me to get something much more in the future. And it didn't stop the headache from coming on. I want to make sure that we know that.
Yeah.
But it allowed me to process that and not let that horrible feedback loop continue of what that headache dictated within me. Another option of thought was, I had a position in time where I was supporting my family no one really knew, and besides me and my dad.
Yep.
And I had no money in my bank account, and I had rent due.
Yep.
And he needed money, and I had no money. And I'm like, this is not good.
Yeah.
And it was either going to be like, just blow up,
Yep.
and like yell at him over the phone, or just be out with it. Or it was like, I was listening to a bit of Joe Dispenza at the time, and it was a bit woo-woo for me at the time, but it was like, start to say what's going to happen is going to happen, like you're going to attract some dollars. It's like, so I say, good things always happen to me. Good things always work out for me. I'm a fucking money magnet. Like, it will happen for me, Stephen. Just breathe, trust, do it. Now, I didn't fully believe everything I was telling myself. Can I be honest with you? But I kept saying it.
Yep.
Kept saying it. I had 2 days. In a day, I got a $2,000 modelling gig.
Wow.
Right? And I was able to ride the next week till I got paid for that gig through some help.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Now, whether there's something up there, I don't know.
Yep.
And I don't pretend to know how it all works.
Yep.
But changing your thoughts, internal dialogue, choosing what is beneficial for your future to some extent and your present, for me was a great way to navigate through the challenges that presented itself in business due to what was happening outside of business.
Yeah, amazing. I love hearing stories like yours because it's very easy to actually trace those shifts in thinking to an external environment that is thriving now. For example, when we spoke before about you've run multiple businesses, you're hosting a podcast, you're really on purpose, you're thriving in your social life, like you're feeling much more that sense of self-worth and everything like that. And so I guess what I hear and what you share is that, like, I believe that it does shift the outcome, but whether it does or not, it definitely shifts the feeling through the whole process, which isn't that what life's about anyway, is like how we feel moment to moment as we're living life. And so it sounds like kind of a beautiful way to just take back control of how we're choosing to feel in the moment too.
Definitely. It's like, there was this thing that I heard, right, is like if you pray for like a closer connection for your family, right?
Yeah.
like, are you just going to wake up the next day and have a closer connection, or does maybe God sometimes put something in the way for you to actually have to work through that so that you can get the closer connection?
Yeah.
You know, like, and it was like, I was like, oh my God, like that makes so much sense. Like sometimes you have barriers put in place in order for you to work through something, so that the outcome of working through that allows you to have, whether it's more peace, more openness, more direction, you know, better outcomes for future things. But it only happens if you see those obstacles as potential gifts to some extent. And I guess I've had a lot of potential obstacles, as everyone has.
Yeah.
And then how you reorientate that obstacle, whether it's small or large, makes a huge difference. Now, I can say that I'm not attached to the outcome of if I get another headache or not. But I'm blessed to say that I've only had maybe one in the last 2 years.
Awesome.
And that was at the very start of going through all the work. But I'd say in the last 18 months, I haven't had one, period.
Man, so good.
Right? But if it happens in the future, it happens in the future, right?
Yep.
And that will be something to work through. But it's knowing that, having worked so much on this and going down both Eastern and Western medicine pathways, a lot of it still comes down to, at the end of the day, connecting your head and your heart. A lot of it, whether it's scientific or whether it's quote unquote woo-woo and spiritual, same stuff applies, man.
Yeah.
And that just requires a greater deal of understanding of that they both effectively work. It's just that how it's communicated is really different. And I think if people learn that they need to be aware that that exists, that is the first step to then actually leaning into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I love that, man. Love that. To kind of bring this conversation to a close, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you mentioned to me before the podcast, which is your real current expression of your heart in the business you're creating around your podcast and the mission that you're bringing in of helping men squeeze the most out of life.
Totally. So the podcast, as you've said, is called Squeezing the Plums, and that came about initially not as an idea of a business, right?
Yeah.
That came out as a way to fully express myself, full and well knowing that there is great opportunity on the other side of doing that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that come up for me was in my Eastern medicine style journey, spiritual style journeys that I'd went through, I went through a ceremony where the end thing that happened after everything was me having this sense of feeling and yelling it out at the top of my lungs of who gives a fuck, right?
Yeah.
Because a big part of what I had restricted was me being open and talking and not caring what other people think, right? And so I lent into this quote unquote business, this quote unquote journey, as a way to break through a barrier that I had otherwise never been able to do before. And in doing that, not being naive, but knowing that, hey, this is a market, this had the potential to be a business, but I'm not going to attack this business in the same way as I've attacked every other business, right? I'm going to attack this business with the idea of having an understanding that I'm navigating and growing through this space, and that I'm open to the opportunities that present themselves, because I'm not attached to a fixed outcome that is dollar related, following related, or like financially related. I've said that already, sorry. But like how many people would view my podcast, for instance?
The metrics.
Metrics, thank you. So, and then in doing that, I just said one thing is I want to set myself was consistency. To give myself the opportunity over time to allow those things to come into my life, I needed consistency. And I think that you have to have some governing principles when you do that, and it's just onus to yourself. So mine was, no matter what, to release one podcast per week. That's it for 52 weeks.
Amazing.
That's it.
Amazing.
And to be willing to receive feedback and to be willing to not be worried about this is why I started it. I'm allowed to change it. Because this at the moment is around helping men squeeze the most out of life.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm loving that.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that I have to do that.
Yeah.
Now that I said I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I'm open to being able to change if it feels right.
Yeah.
And that's, once again, going back to the fundamental principle of sort of connecting head and heart, right? Because I know that if I do that, the outcomes of the business will be always better.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's a really interesting time, because by doing this, I'm hoping to one day maybe reflect back on this conversation and say, hey, look, well, this is where it ended up.
Yeah.
You know, and I've seen it work for my physical body.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to see how it works for my business.
Yeah.
And that's the process I'm on with that. And, you know, over the course of the next however long, if I continue to try to tap in and fulfill what feels right for me, then I feel that that will be very beneficial in one way, shape or form.
I love that, man. One of the real lessons I got hearing you express all of that is that, and please correct me if this is wrong, but that with the podcast, for example, you're very clear on your why from the essence of the values of what you're choosing to do it for, which I heard as expression. And I'm also hearing service in there as well.
Yeah.
And the form that might take is very fluid. It could change.
You articulated that really nice.
Yeah, and I think that's something that like all business leaders can learn from as well, right? Is when we're really clear on our why, on our values and our mission, but at that essence level,
Yes.
then we can be much more open to like what direction is actually going to be the most supported and needed as well with our service. And there's always a bit of a dance as well with like, you know, not chasing the shiny objects and sort of that kind of thing too. But I feel that those guiding principles for me is something that's so critical with leadership. Are there any other guiding principles that are important to you that you haven't spoken to yet?
For leadership in particular, I think the most important thing is understanding it's not good or bad.
Yeah.
You know, I think there is effective leadership.
Yep.
And I think that everyone possesses a quality to have effective leadership.
Yep.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be based off rank or position or authority. It can be really based off, you know, as I heard Simon Sinek say, but to the person to the left and right of you.
Yeah.
And I really resonated with that.
Yeah.
And if you know how to lead on a small scale, you can lead on a large scale. And I think everyone can just start with the person to the left and the right of them, and knowing how to be able to do a couple of things of, you know, have the ability to tap into listening and then tap into articulating, so that you have the capacity to positively influence based off your intention where you want either the relationship, the business to go in life. And I think that's something that's super important. I'm going to ask you a question though.
Yeah, please.
In terms of your podcast now,
Yeah.
Leaders with Heart,
Yeah.
I guess when you're looking at this as a business for you, what is it that you hope that this business gives you as the founder of it?
Yeah. The podcast specifically?
The podcast.
Yeah. So my primary intentions for starting the podcast were to support my own mission as a bridge between the business and spirituality worlds, because I've gotten so much from my own journey, whether it be in nature, with connecting with indigenous cultures around the world, whether it be sitting in different types of ceremonies. It's revolutionized my life, where I feel like I get to live the most magical, joyous, blissful life I could possibly imagine, and beyond that, to be honest. All the dreams that I had as a kid, I'm like, it's all beyond my wildest dreams. And I'm like, okay, cool. I want this for everyone. And I want this for especially the people that are going to be of a large scale service, which is, from my experience, leaders have one of the best opportunities to do that. So what I get out of this podcast and the way that it serves me is finding ways to share messages across that bridge, if that makes sense, and translate it in a way that is understandable. So, which is definitely a big journey for me, because I'm someone who loves the woo-woo and really loves speaking in that language. So I've got to let some of that go, because it's the form that doesn't serve the essence.
Yeah.
But yeah, and simultaneously, it's giving me an opportunity, these conversations, to connect deeper with people from all walks of life, which is, really a big part of why I do it as well.
It's awesome, man.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's nice to, have the opportunity sometimes to really share that too.
Yeah. Thanks, bro.
And nice.
I appreciate that. So anything else that you'd like to share before we close this podcast?
No, it's been really nice to be able to discuss those things with you. And maybe what we can do is, if there's something else that comes up post conversation, maybe it's someone that's listened that's got a question or whatever it is, we can lean into it maybe in a future episode. But I think for now we've really gone in pretty deep, and happy to have done that as well.
Beautiful, brother. And people can best find you Squeezing the Plums podcast, Spotify and YouTube.
Yeah, so Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. It's called Squeezing the Plums.
Yep.
Give it a little follow, alongside obviously with your podcast too.
Just want to say it's a really well handled podcast, beautifully interviewed by Steve, and very well put together. So I've listened to a few other episodes as well, and highly recommend it.
Thank you, man.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. Thanks for listening to Leaders with Heart today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you want to stay connected, you can find us on social media via the links in the show notes below. You can also like, share, subscribe, and comment on this particular episode, which really helps us spread this message of leading with heart. And we hope you enjoy the future conversations with the guests we've got coming up as well. If you want to connect more with myself and the work I do in leadership coaching, you can head on over to apexleadership.com.au and find out more there. Thanks so much. Have a beautiful week.